On the Hill today, President Obama's choice to lead the CIA, former Clinton Chief of Staff Leon Panetta, vowing to run an agency that sounds an awful lot like the awful one of Mr. Bush. Panetta, after today's hearing, telling the Associated Press it is official administration policy not to prosecute any CIA officers who might have tortured people because they were following what they thought were legal orders from a president. And at his hearing, backpedaling from his testimony yesterday that the U.S. had renditioned terror suspects, including sending them overseas to governments that tortured people, well, to other governments. Republican Senator Kit Bond pressing him, concluding bizarrely, blaming news reports for the CIA's bad intel.
You stated yesterday that we transported people for the purpose of torture. Now, nothing you've said tells me that you have any solid information for that. Do you have any information? So would you retract that statement?
Senator, on that particular quote that people were transferred for purposes of torture, that was not the policy of the United States. It was clearly to transfer people for purposes of questioning and receiving assurances that that would not take place. So to that extent, yes, I would retract that statement.
All right, because that's a serious assertion. Maybe media, liberal blogs, but having made that statement, you, not a private citizen, but as a nominee for this very important position, cannot be making statements or making judgments based on rumors or news stories. And that was one of the elements that was at the base of our misinformation and the bad intelligence we got.
We'll try to explain that bit of kabuki theater in a moment, but in fact the administration ginned up bogus CIA intel from people like Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, who after he was renditioned to Egypt claimed that Saddam Hussein offered to train al-Qaeda operatives about WMD. The reason they got bad information is that they beat it out of him. That was according to a liberal blog? No, to Dan Coleman, FBI veteran who worked closely with the CIA on terrorism. And which liberal blog demanded that the policies of the United States, quote, do not result in the transfer of individuals to other nations to face torture? That was whitehouse.gov on January 22nd, with one of the first executive orders from President Barack Obama. Let's turn now to Professor Jonathan Turley, scholar of constitutional law at George Washington University, in the wake of what Mr. Panetta said today. Thanks for your time tonight, John.
Hi, Keith.
You've addressed this before. Please summarize it again. On the assumption that you are going to prosecute those who ordered, why can't you ignore those who perpetrated?
Well, it's astonishing how cavalier some members of this new administration are being. You know, we established the rule that just following orders is not a defense. We executed people who argued that after World War II. It doesn't mean that there's not a legal defense to protect CIA officials, but that comes with an investigation. You have an investigation, and you don't state an irrebuttable presumption the way that they did here. And I think the rest of the world is looking at this and saying, my Lord, the nation that helped create the international law governing human rights and war crimes is saying just following orders is a clear and unimpeachable defense.
All right, let's look for a silver lining in this. Is there any reason to infer from what Panetta said that, in fact, they would be prosecuting or chasing those who ordered, if not those who actually perpetrated?
Well, I'd love to say that, but that's the line that we've all been waiting to come after each of these tirades. The Obama administration says passionately over and over again, we won't let anyone prosecute people accused of being torturers. But they don't follow up by saying, of course, we will investigate those who ordered torture. And the absence of that statement leaves many of us very, very concerned, because it is the law. It is what we agreed to. It's the foundations of war crimes. And by the way, you can't say you're going to prosecute terrorists and say you're not sure if you'll prosecute war crimes. They're cut from the same bolt. They are equal violations of international law.
Yeah, absolutely. Why would Panetta blink on the factuality of renditioning for torture? I mean, should that make us worry, or is that just the sort of thing that you say to get the hearing over with fast when you're talking to some crazy senator like he seemed to be in that case?
Well, I couldn't believe when he retracted that statement, because those stories are based on statements made by people in the administration. These stories quote people as saying that we have used rendition so that someone can be tortured. And one guy said, I think in the Washington Post, we don't beat these guys up. We send them to other places to have them beaten up. Well, that's not a liberal blog. That's not a newspaper. That's the people involved in the process. And it is part of the great shame that we were hoping this administration could at least partially lift from this nation.
Yeah, we didn't send Al-Libi to Egypt so he could visit the baths. We sent him there to as they said, beat him up and get the answers we wanted to justify an unjustifiable war. Last question, what about Panetta in there hanging or hinging his answer, I guess is a better way to phrase it, on the notion that it was not official U.S. policy to rendition for torture? Does that tell us anything about his thinking?
Well, unfortunately, it preserves the very ambiguity that the previous administration created and flourished in. By saying that things aren't policy, they allowed themselves to argue when these things came forward that they were just rogue employees. They were just a bunch of guys who got out of control. And in reality, it was the culture, and the culture was created by a known policy.
Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. If you're worried, I'm worried. Great thanks, John.
Thanks, Keith.